She was marked for death and left hanging in the trees, bound, bloodied, forgotten. But when the blizzard rolled through Deadwood Pines, something else found her first. Not a rescue team, not a man. A scarred Mustang broke formation, vanished into the storm, and led his herd toward what no creature should have sensed. What followed wasn't instinct, it was memory, and it would unravel everything the forest thought it knew about loyalty, survival, and the line between animal and guardian. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from, and if you enjoy this story, don't forget to subscribe. The blizzard swept over Deadwood Pines with the force of a living wall, swallowing the world in white. Snow came down in dense, endless sheets, turning the forest into an abstract painting. Gray trunks vanished, the branches vanished, and then the very air itself vanished, smothered by the relentless storm. The wind screamed through the tall pines, twisting drifts of snow from bough to bough, making even the familiar trails unrecognizable. It wasn't just quiet, it was the quiet of anticipation of something immense holding its breath. Every so often, a gust would rattle through the timber, setting a spray of snow loose like icy confetti, but otherwise the only sound was the deep, low hum of the wind. It was the kind of cold that clung to the bones, the kind that made you want to shout just to hear your own voice. But even then, you'd be answered by nothing but silence. The Rangers had never seen a storm quite like this one. Their radios crackled with static, and the GPS trackers clipped to their belts stuttered in and out of range, blue lights winking and dying as the snow thickened. They pressed onward all the same. There were no days off for the Clearwater Ridge Mustang Patrol, not when weather could mean life or death for the wild horses under their protection. Besides, routine was the only way to survive such winters. Stick to the schedule, keep the herd moving, keep yourself moving, and maybe the cold wouldn't find a place to settle in your heart. The patrol was a strange mixture of purpose and resignation. Every ranger knew that today's training was less about skill than about endurance. In the open, faces stung by wind, their figures half lost in the white haze, they led the Mustang unit in its practice circuit, just shapes moving through a world stripped of color, trying to keep order in the chaos. No horse stood out more among the herd than Ash. Gray-black, thick-shouldered, his mane and tail often dusted with frost, Ash carried himself with a silent power. His eyes were striking, a deep, intelligent brown that held something old, something no human could name. But what made Ash unmistakable was the long, silver scar running from the tip of his left ear down the cheek, a glinting thread beneath the short winter coat. No one in the unit ever spoke of how he got it. Some guessed it was from a barbed wire fence during a rescue gone wrong. Others said it happened on a mission that didn't make the official records. Ash never gave the answer. He simply bore the mark as he did everything else, quietly, without complaint. Unlike the other Mustangs, Ash needed neither rein nor whip. He responded to words as if he understood them, to subtle gestures, and most strikingly, to the things that were never said out loud. The other horses in the unit had learned to watch Ash, to sense his moods and shift their own in response, as if he set the tempo for the whole herd. On paper, Ash was a retired service animal, his official designation an old, faded number on a medical record, but in the forest he was something else. Guardian, guide, the soul of memory for the unit. Ranger Eli Walker once called him the keeper of memories. Others simply called him the old man. Either way, it was Ash the Rangers looked to when storms made the world uncertain, and Ash the horses followed without question. They were nearing a bend where the trail snaked around a half-frozen creek, the wind funneling between the trees so sharply that it seemed to whistle. The snow was knee-deep, making each step slow, but the herd pressed on, forming a dark line against the white. That was when Ash stopped. No signal, no call. No whinny from a lead mare or scent of a predator on the wind. Just a sudden, complete halt, as if his body had run up against something invisible. He lifted his head, nostrils flaring, his ears pivoted like antennae, catching the shifting gusts. His mane bristled, standing on end along the ridge of his neck. He stamped his left hoof once on the icy ground, just enough to make a sharp crack in the snow crust, a sound almost lost in the wind. It wasn't a scent that made him stop, at least not one that registered to human senses. It was something deeper, a memory, or perhaps a warning that came not from the world around him but from somewhere inside. a place where only instinct and experience could reach. The northeast wind changed, carrying with it nothing tangible, nothing anyone else could sense, but for Ash it was enough. Something called him, urgently, from a distance beyond the visible. The Rangers noticed Ash's change at once. "Hey Ash, easy boy," Eli called, cupping his hands to project above the gale. A sharp whistle followed, a command Ash never ignored. The old Mustang didn't so much as twitch an ear. Another Ranger flashed a laser pointer, tracing a green dot along the snow. Nothing. A third tried the radio control collar, a last resort reserved for emergencies. The signal went out, but Ash didn't pause. Instead, he took 2 careful steps forward, his entire body taut with expectation. Then, with no more warning, he exploded into motion, plunging off the trail and into the deep woods, vanishing into the curtain of snow like a shadow melting into the dark. The patrol leader, a woman named Meredith Hanley, stood frozen. "That horse has never disobeyed a command in his life," she muttered, bewildered. She pressed the button on her shoulder mic. "Dispatch, this is Unit Clearwater. Possible animal in distress, static." Then a garbled reply. The storm was playing havoc with the comms. There was no guarantee anyone would hear them. Eli stared after Ash, jaw set. He'd seen the look in Ash's eyes, a look not of defiance, but of desperate appeal. "He's not running," Eli said quietly, almost to himself. "He's answering something we can't see." Nobody stopped him as he pulled his coat tighter and started checking his gear. The rest of the team watched, silent, as Ash's hoof prints quickly filled with drifting snow. For a moment, the patrol and the remaining horses simply stood in the whiteout, as if stunned. Then, as if drawn by an invisible thread, 3 more Mustangs began to fidget. Their bodies tensed, heads swinging as if searching for a sound no one else could hear. One of them, a young bay with a jagged blaze, let out a short, sharp whinny. It wasn't fear. It was a question, or perhaps a call to something long forgotten. The tension rippled down the line. One after another, the Mustangs stepped out of formation. They didn't run after Ash, but moved toward different points in the woods, eyes wide and fixed on nothing, ears low and twitching. The Rangers didn't shout, didn't give chase. Something in the air, a kind of gravity, almost held everyone in place. It felt less like a loss of discipline and more like a gathering of purpose, one that none of the humans could understand. Meredith whispered, "They're not bolting, they're returning to something." No one argued. The snow fell heavier. The silence thickened, as if the forest itself waited to see what would happen next. Eli didn't bother to explain. He slung his pack over one shoulder and checked his locator beacon. A little red light blinked in the storm, but whether it would actually guide anyone was another matter. Before leaving, he activated his field recorder and clipped it to his jacket. Walker, Eli, following Ash and 3 other Mustangs, possible behavioral anomaly. Possible, I don't know. If anyone's listening to this later, I'm sorry I can't give you more. He looked up at the others, most of whom had worked alongside Ash for years. "I don't think he's breaking protocol," Ellie said quietly. "I think he's going back to something we never finished." No one tried to stop him. Meredith gave a short, worried nod, and one of the older Rangers quietly pressed a spare radio into his hand. The wind picked up as Eli set off, tracing Ash's fresh tracks into the deepening white. The snow was now nearly to his knees, and visibility dropped to a few yards, but he pressed on, keeping his head low. With every step, the storm seemed to fade into the background, replaced by the steady thud of his own heart and the memory of Ash's eyes. The plea, the warning, the call for help that no human could hear but no one could ignore. He did not look back. Behind him, the patrol and the rest of the herd stood motionless, their shapes already blurred by the storm, waiting for news, or perhaps, in their own way, hoping for a different kind of rescue. In the distance, the deep woods swallowed Ash and the others. Somewhere, out of sight, an old scar gleamed against gray fur, and a forgotten story began to stir from the snow and the silence. The forest grew denser as Ash pressed forward, plunging deeper into the white heart of deadwood pines. Each hoof fell with careful urgency, leaving an imprint in the snow that was instantly softened by new flakes. The world behind him faded, The voices of the rangers, the whistling of recall signals, even the echo of other Mustangs' hoofbeats. All that remained was the silent, urgent pull, an instinct that didn't quite fit the word, for it was closer to memory than reflex, something old and unfinished calling him through the white. Snow covered all tracks, erasing the world's recent history, but Ash moved as if following a hidden thread. No scent drifted through the icy air, no trail of blood or disturbed foliage to guide him. The forest itself seemed to have drawn its breath, the silence so complete it felt thick enough to touch. Birds were quiet, the usual squirrel chatter gone, as if even the animals sensed that something unspoken stalked between the pines. Yet here and there Ash noticed the faintest signs, a depression in the snow, not made by hoof or paw, but by something heavy, dragged for a time, then vanished as if swallowed by the earth. Further ahead, a low branch lay snapped at an unnatural angle, the wood freshly splintered, pale against the dark bark. From its end, a length of rope dangled, swaying ever so slightly in the wind. The forest had been disturbed, but not in any way that made sense to human or horse. Ash paused, breath steaming. For a heartbeat the world held perfectly still, as if poised on the edge of revelation. His body tensed all at once. Ears upright, neck stretched forward, nostrils flaring, Ash stared intently at a massive pine tree standing alone in a small clearing. The storm had abated for just a moment here, as though nature itself had drawn a circle around the scene. From a branch some 10 feet above the ground, a woman hung upside down. Her legs were bound at the ankles with thick, weather-stiff rope looped cruelly over the limb. Her arms, twisted unnaturally behind her back, were tied with a second knot. The hood of her parka had slipped back, revealing a face smeared with blood and dirt, streaks of frozen hair plastered across her cheeks and forehead. Blood trickled from a cut on her temple, painting her skin a vivid crimson before dropping slowly and rhythmically onto the snow below. Each drop made a small, perfect scarlet crater in the pure white, a tally of pain and defiance that echoed into the silent woods. Her lips were blue, cracked by cold, her eyes, squeezed shut, twitched behind lashes heavy with frost. Ash didn't move. He didn't whinny or rear or flee at the scent of blood. He simply stood, looking up, his entire presence an island of focus in the heart of the forest. The only sounds were the shivering wind and the steady, almost ritualistic drip of blood onto the snow. He waited. After several still, silent seconds, Ash stepped forward. There was no fear in his movement, no haste. What he did next was more than animal curiosity, it was ceremony, the revival of an ancient code that humans could only sense, never explain. He lowered his body, folding his front legs until his knees pressed into the snow, his neck arched down, mane rippling as a stray breeze swept through. Ash's head dropped so low that his muzzle nearly brushed the cold crust beneath the tree. His chest pressed close to the earth in a posture that could only be described as reverence, or perhaps supplication. It was not a gesture learned in a corral or taught in a training barn. It was something inherited, something sacred. Then, gently, Ash stretched his head forward until his long forelock grazed the woman's boots, just enough to stir a faint current of air around her legs. It was a greeting, but not for a stranger. An invocation, a whisper without words. I see you, I know you're here. This was not patrol protocol, not a trained rescue maneuver. This was reunion, called from a place far deeper than instinct, where grief, memory, and hope all mingled and made their own language. Ash was not there to save. He was there to bear witness, to insist, simply by being present, that she had not disappeared from the world. A tremor moved through the woman's body, a faint, broken exhalation, so soft it was nearly lost in the wind. Her eyelids fluttered, then painfully cracked open just enough to let in a slit of cold light. For a moment she did not seem to see anything, then her gaze fell, struggling to focus through the blood and frost, and landed on the horse below. She blinked, once, twice, and in the space between those blinks something changed. She saw a glint in Ash's eyes, a flash of silver memory beneath the scar. In that gaze, she recognized something she had not believed she would ever see again, A name came unbidden to her lips, a name cracked with cold, thick with old pain. Phantom? It was less a question than a gasp, a plea thrown across the years. Her voice broke. "You're still alive?" For Riley Shaw, the lines between memory and reality began to blur. She remembered, dimly, another horse, a Mustang with a pale mane and wild, gentle eyes. Her closest partner in the old life, the partner she had lost on a night much like this, in a mission that ended with silence and shame. But this wasn't phantom. As the world spun and her vision swam, Riley's mind struggled to reconcile the faces of the past with the one before her. The horse was different, darker, older, but watching her with that same patient, soul-deep understanding. Ash. Not just a Mustang, but the last living witness who remembered her name. Her breath rattled in her throat. She closed her eyes, not in defeat, but in surrender. After so many years of battle, she let herself drift just for a second, held by the knowledge that someone, something, still stood guard in the world. If the blizzard had a heart, it was here. In the middle of the white expanse, a woman hung, battered and nearly spent, suspended by ropes that bit into frozen skin. Below her, a great Mustang knelt, not moving, not calling out, not seeking help. Only witnessing, only being. No music scored the moment, no shouts or gunshots broke the hush. There was only the raw fact of survival in its most essential form, one creature standing sentinel for another. No command, no reward, only the fierce, ancient bond between souls shaped by hardship and grace. Ash's breath steamed in the cold, slow and steady. Riley's blood continued to fall in tiny, bright drops, marking the snow as if each were a silent drumbeat. Alive, alive, alive. Above and below, predator and prey, victim and savior, all boundaries blurred, reduced to the simplicity of presence. Ash was not there as a tool. He was not even there as a horse. He was there as a promise, one only the heart could keep. The sound of boots crunching hurriedly through the snow startled even the silent trees. Eli Walker burst into the clearing, breath clouding, his jacket slick with frost. He was not prepared for what he found. Ash, immobile as a statue beneath a dangling, half-frozen woman. For a moment, Eli's brain refused to process the scene and he almost lost his footing, sliding sideways on the packed snow. But training and instinct took over. He rushed to the tree, eyes darting between Ash, whose massive form still blocked the wind from Riley, and the limp figure overhead. His hands fumbled with his knife, teeth chattering as he worked the frozen rope. It was tied with a cruelty that made his stomach turn, a kind of executioner's knot, designed to end breathing, not merely restrain. He sliced through the cords, catching Riley as she dropped awkwardly, nearly lifeless, into his arms. Her body was stiff, blood still leaking from the gash on her head, and her hands were icy blocks behind her back. He quickly untied her wrists, rubbing life into her fingers, checking her airway and pulse, with the measured calm that only comes from too many nights spent saving people who never expected to be found. Riley's lips moved again, still that one name, Phantom. Phantom. It was all she seemed able to say, as if that single word was a rope holding her to the world. Eli cradled her, wrapping his arms tight around her shivering form. "It's okay," he whispered. "I've got you. You're safe now." Ash, as if responding to some silent command, raised his right front hoof and tapped the ground 3 times in slow, deliberate rhythm. Once, twice, a third time. It was not a code any human knew, but it was a promise, a signal between survivors. A story, long buried beneath the snow, had begun to awaken. The white woods stood silent as always, but now, deep in their frozen heart, the line between animal and witness, between savior and memory, had blurred forever. Eli Walker raced through the snow, carrying Riley's barely conscious body back to Clearwater Ridge Ranger Station. The wind was relentless, flinging stinging shards of ice against his face as he navigated the buried trail. Every step felt heavier, both from exhaustion and the gnawing fear that the woman in his arms would not survive the night. The station was little more than a fortified wooden cabin perched on the edge of the wilderness. Once inside, Eli worked with the efficient calm that only comes from 100 small emergencies. Thermal blankets, heated gloves, an emergency IV oxygen cannula pressed beneath blue lips. He checked her pulse, thready but present, then wrapped another blanket around her, willing heat back into her frozen body. Riley's eyes fluttered open only in brief, feverish moments. In those slivers of consciousness she whispered words that made no sense to the others gathered. Phantom, 04, Theta? Her voice was so faint that Eli had to lean in, catching only fragments, as she drifted again into the gray world between waking and oblivion. He called the hospital at Flathead, voice steady but tense, reporting Riley's hypothermia and blood loss. The nurse's answer was grim. The blizzard had grounded every chopper for miles and the snow would not ease for hours. "Keep her warm, don't let her sleep too long, we'll come as soon as we can." That was all they could promise. Through it all, Ash stood just outside the cabin door. He didn't try to force his way in or make a sound of impatience. Instead, the Mustang stood watch, tapping his hoof against the frozen earth. 1, 2, 3, over and over, a rhythm that seemed to echo Riley's heartbeat. Snow dusted his mane and back, but he never moved away, not even when the world shrank to a single circle of lamplight and hope inside that battered ranger station. Dawn brought little relief. The storm hadn't lifted, but Eli knew that every minute lost meant clues erased by the falling snow. He left Riley in the care of another ranger, then shouldered his pack and set out again for the clearing where they'd found her. Ash joined him before Eli could say a word. No halter, no rope. The horse moved with a sense of purpose so clear that Eli didn't question it. Side by side they trekked back into the woods, Eli's boots crunching, Ash's steps light but sure. At the edge of the clearing, the world looked clean, almost untouched. But Eli crouched, scanning the ground. Beneath a thin crust of fresh powder he found deep, ragged gouges in the frozen dirt. Scratches that ran far longer and deeper than any elk or bear could make. He knelt beside one, pressing his gloved fingers along the ridges. "That's not any hoof I know," he murmured, mostly to himself. Ash moved ahead, nose close to the ground. They followed a trail of battered saplings and a young pine torn from the earth, its roots twisted in a spiral. It hadn't been snapped by wind. Something massive, something deliberate, had yanked it from the ground and left it behind as a signpost. Beneath a jutting slab of granite, Ash suddenly halted. He pawed at the snow, head low, and drew in a long, trembling breath. The wind gusted down from the heights, carrying with it a scent so sharp that Ash's whole body flinched. His ears flattened, then pricked up again as if unsure whether to be afraid or to remember. Eli watched him closely, not daring to speak. Ash seemed to be chasing ghosts, memories more than tracks. Eli took out his phone, hands shaking with cold and nerves, and snapped pictures of the tracks. He uploaded them to the wildlife database, one that held records of every known animal in Deadwood Pines. Mule deer, mountain lions, wild mustangs, even the occasional black bear. No matches. These weren't the hoofprints of any natural creature. They were deeper than a horse's, with sharper edges and a length that suggested a stride unlike anything in Montana's wilderness. The tracks weren't spaced like a grazing animal, they zigzagged, sometimes looping back on themselves in odd spirals. It looked less like hunting, more like evasion. Or, Eli thought with a shudder, like something searching for its way back to somewhere it no longer belonged. He turned to Ash. "You know what's out here, don't you?" Ash didn't look at him, only walked to the spot beneath the tree where Riley had hung and stood utterly still. The horse dropped his head, let out a sound, a low, breathy whinny, barely more than a sigh. It was so soft that Eli wondered if he'd imagined it, but in that moment the forest seemed to lean in, listening. It was not a call for help, nor a challenge. It was, Eli sensed, an answer, a confirmation. Something that did not belong in any database was here, and Ash was the only one who could remember what it was. Another gust of wind rattled the branches. Ash suddenly whipped his head around, stretching his neck to touch his nose to a battered trunk, one that still bore fresh scars. He inhaled, deep and shuddering, and then struck the earth twice with his hoof, sharp and decisive. And Eli watched him, not understanding, but feeling the air in the clearing change. The horse's eyes caught the morning light, a flicker of recognition passing across their dark surface. There was no fear, only an intense, searching alertness. Eli stepped closer, careful not to startle him. "What is it, Ash?" But Ash was lost to the world, lost in something ancient and chemical and overwhelming. He sniffed again, then let out a hot, foggy breath. The scent in the air was a blend of burned wood, metal, and dry prairie grass. It was not the living, healthy smell of horses or the musky tang of elk or deer. It was the odor of a forge, of biolabs, of training grounds soaked with sweat and memory. It was the smell, Eli realized, of war, of survival forced upon living things. And within it all was something else, something achingly familiar to Ash, the scent of phantom. Eli remembered the name Riley had whispered in her fever, "Phantom, phantom." He looked at Ash, whose entire body was trembling, not from cold but from the weight of memory. This was not just the smell of life, it was the scent of a bond broken and reforged in pain, something old and yet impossibly returned. Back at the station, as the day wore on and Riley slept fitfully under layers of wool and heat packs, Eli pulled an old binder from the Ranger's archive. The cover was warped, stained by years of coffee and stormwater. He flipped through its brittle pages, searching for any record of the name that now haunted both the horse and the woman. There, half blurred by time and mildew, was a single cryptic entry: Phantom, Unit M. No photo, no DNA swab, not even a note of color or age, just one line, scribbled in an unfamiliar hand. Separated from Ash, September, year unknown, did not return. Eli stared at the page, feeling the world shift. He stood and looked out the frosted window, where Ash now waited near the paddock gate, mane dusted with snow, gaze fixed on the black mouth of the forest. The realization came slowly, an ache spreading from Eli's chest down to his shaking hands. Ash was not tracking to bring a lost herd home, or to answer a whistle. He was seeking a piece of himself, a fragment of the past the world had buried but which the snow could not erase. For the first time, Eli understood. "Ash, you're not looking for the way back. You're looking for a memory." Ash didn't need a command. He was following a call that no human ear could hear, a summons older than orders and far more true. Eli placed a hand on the frosted glass, watching the Mustang stand vigil. He felt, more than thought, that whatever had begun with the storm was not just about survival or duty. It was about memory, about the return of something wild, something wounded, that could never truly die so long as even one living soul remembered. The snow kept falling, soft and implacable, bearing all but the freshest tracks. And in the hush that followed, Ash stood waiting, every muscle tensed, not for the next order, but for the echo of a lost friend, the promise that one day even a ghost might return. 48 hours after being found in the forest, Riley Shaw finally opened her eyes to the world. Not the fevered half-waking she'd drifted through, but true consciousness, sharp and present. The air inside Clearwater Ridge Ranger Station was heavy with the wood smoke of a persistent winter, the faint tang of antiseptic, and the anxious energy of people who had witnessed something they could not yet explain. Eli was the first to notice her awake, hovering at the doorway. Riley's body was battered and weak, wrapped in blankets, with a heating pad at her back and a cannula tucked beneath her nose, but her eyes, when they settled on Eli, were focused, almost uncomfortably lucid. Her first words came not as a gasp for water or a demand for explanation, but as a clear, steady question. "Ash is still here?" Eli nodded, relief blossoming in his tired face. "He hasn't left the door since you got back." A weary, crooked smile crept across Riley's lips. "Good," she said, her voice thin but resolute. "If he's still here, then I haven't lost all hope yet." No one in the room asked her to explain. They didn't have to. It was as if the storm outside, the tension of the rescue, and the unspoken connection between ranger and horse had all combined into a single, silent urge. Now is the time for the truth to be spoken. Riley inhaled, slow and deliberate. Then she began to talk as though she'd held this story so long it had grown too heavy for her chest. Before Deadwood Pines, before the name Riley Shaw appeared on any ranger's roster, she had been an Army lieutenant, a rising expert in the new field of tactical animal psychology. She had thought she understood the cost of loyalty, the boundaries between science and the soul. But when the letter came, marked only with an eagle insignia and an untraceable code, she found herself recruited into a project with no official name, no oversight, and no way back. The program was called Whitefire, a black-budget initiative straddling the Department of Defense, DARPA, and, most disturbingly, the Department of the Interior. It was a strange mix of military ambition and ecological rhetoric, one that sought to blur the line between what was wild and what could be weaponized. Within Whitefire, Riley was not herself, but subject 4. Her role was never to train horses in the traditional sense. Instead, she was assigned to condition, shape, and ultimately program a cohort of Mustangs for battlefield survival, independent decision-making, and rapid response tactics, skills far beyond the reach of any bridle or whip. It was a task that required not just science, but empathy, intuition, and a willingness to let the animal's nature speak for itself. 2 Mustangs rose to the top of the program, not just for their intelligence or stamina, but for their uncanny ability to read and respond to the emotions of those around them. Phantom and Ash, the pride and secret of Whitefire. Phantom, Riley explained, her gaze far away, was the wildest horse I ever met. Pure Nevada Mustang, coal-black, impossible to break. He never let anyone touch him, except me, and that, they said, was what made him valuable. Ash, by contrast, was a product of careful breeding, Spanish Mustang crossed with military-bred Arabian, all muscle and discipline but with a soft eye and a fierce, silent protectiveness. Where Phantom's wildness seemed to threaten the walls of every corral, Ash carried a quiet loyalty, never aggressive but always aware, always waiting for a signal no one else could give. They couldn't be commanded by voice or rope or threat, Riley continued. You had to earn their trust, and once you had it, they listened with their hearts. She smiled a little at the memory. Phantom would only let me touch his face if Ash was nearby. Sometimes, they'd both stamp their hooves in the same rhythm like they were hearing music we couldn't, or turn together suddenly toward some danger only they could sense. But that fragile harmony was doomed. One night, without warning, Phantom disappeared from the unit. No announcement, no protocol, just gone. I heard the news after midnight, Riley said, her voice tightening. Phantom was being transferred to a new testing site. I wasn't told where. I ran to the stables before sunrise. He was already chained, both forelegs shackled, tail tied, ready for transport. She tried to argue, plead, shout down the agents in black coats who had come to take him. I told him it was a mistake, that he wasn't ready, that they were breaking him. They didn't listen. Phantom didn't resist. He didn't fight or scream. He just stood there, looking at her, and in his deep, liquid eyes, Riley read a single question. You're not coming with me? It broke her. She stood frozen, unable to move as the agents pulled Phantom away. That was the last time I saw him, she said softly. After that, there were no records. The project files vanished. They shut the whole unit down. The memory was raw, cutting deeper than any wound, and in that pain Riley understood what it meant to lose not just an animal, but a piece of her own soul. After Phantom was taken, Riley tried every channel she could to find him. Officially, there was no record of his existence. Every door she knocked on led only to silence or veiled threats. The more she searched, the more she saw the truth. Whitefire was never about saving lives or ecological restoration. It was about making weapons out of living things. When she sent a final, desperate report to her superiors, the answer came swift and chilling. A sudden transfer to Alaska, effective immediately. It was less an assignment than an exile, a silent erasure. Rather than wait for the noose to tighten, Riley made her own escape. She disappeared from the system, resurfacing in Montana as a ranger under her real name, working far from the grasp of military bureaucracy. She'd thought she could leave the past behind, but she never stopped looking for answers. Or for Phantom. As Riley finished her story, a strange quiet fell over the room. Eli shifted, unsure what to say. The snow had stopped outside, a pale sunlight filtered through the window, glinting off the icicles. But before anyone could speak, a dull thump echoed from the back of the station. Ash had moved to the edge of the compound, nose to the ground beneath an ancient pine. Eli watched as the Mustang pawed the earth, scraping through the snow and mulch in a deliberate pattern. 1, 2, 3. A signal from old days, an echo of some code Riley and the horses had once shared. With strong, careful strokes, Ash unearthed a small metal tube, rusted but still sealed at the ends. He nudged it toward Eli, who knelt and twisted the cap free. Inside was a scrap of old, silver-backed military map, creased and water-stained, but with a single red X marked over a set of remote coordinates. Riley gasped, the color draining from her cheeks. "That's it! That's Zone X! That's where they took Phantom!" The area had years ago been declared off-limits, a fire, a chemical spill, the official story said. No one allowed within a mile, but Riley now saw the truth. "Ash must have buried this the last time we were here," she whispered. "Kept it hidden, like a memory he refused to let die." The map, the Mustang's actions, the tangled threads of trauma and hope, it all aligned. Zone X was out there, waiting. The only way to understand what had happened to Phantom, to Whitefire, to the ghosts haunting them all, was to follow the path Ash had guarded for so long. Eli looked at Riley. "If Ash found this, maybe he's telling us it's time." Riley reached out, stroking Ash's scarred cheek. "He always knew, even when the rest of us forgot." The old secrets had been unearthed, but the journey was only beginning. Out in the snow, the wind rose again, carrying not just the bite of winter but the electric promise of unfinished business. The morning they left the station, the world outside was a canvas of gray and white. Clouds pressed low, snow softening every edge of the landscape, mountains rising like half-remembered ghosts. Riley moved with quiet resolve, her wounds wrapped and her resolve sharper than ever. Eli checked the last of their supplies, eyes flickering over the battered map Ash had unearthed, and Ash himself waited by the door, utterly still except for the faint flick of his ear, as if listening to some call only he could hear. No one suggested taking a vehicle. In the wilds of the Granite Crown Range, tires and engines meant little against snowdrifts and suspicion. Instead, they saddled the horses lightly, each carrying only what was essential: a rifle apiece, some emergency rations, and the kind of silence that pressed tight to your ribs. The GPS units were switched off and stashed deep. No signal, no tracking, no chance for whatever still lingered in the shadows to follow them by machine. Ash led, his hooves cut a purposeful line through the fresh snow, not one step wasted, as if the turns of the trail, the rise and dip of the ridges, had all been burned into the muscle memory of his bones. Behind him, Riley and Eli exchanged glances. The horse moved with a confidence that was more than animal. It was as if he'd walked this path not just once, but 1,000 times in the aching corridors of his mind. They passed through stands of black pine, across frozen streams and along switchbacks so narrow that even the wind seemed to hesitate before following, and finally, where the cliffs drew back and the forest ended in a tumble of shattered stone, they found what they had come for. Hidden beneath a drift of powder and half-buried boulders, a massive iron door was set into the rock face. Its green paint had flaked away in the years since it was last touched, the handle crusted with rust, but the faint outline of old stenciling remained. Utility Theta Sector 3, the rest was lost to time. Eli ran his gloved hand over the letters, then looked to Riley, who was already unstrapping a battered, waterproof keyboard from her bag. "This is it," she whispered. "God help us." Accessing the keypad was an act of archaeology. Riley clipped a backup power pack into the side panel, carefully rewiring around chewed insulation and burst solder. With each code she entered, the old system flickered with uncertain life. It took 3 attempts, each met with a silent prayer and a held breath, before a green LED winked to life and a heavy relay clicked somewhere deep inside the stone. The door groaned open, scraping over gravel and ice, exhaling a breath of cold that was older than memory. Ash stepped through first. His stride was slow but not tentative, his nostrils wide as he tasted the air for ghosts. Eli followed with his flashlight raised, sweeping the beam across what remained: shattered safety glass, control panels laced with mold, walls scored with deep gouges that shimmered under the light. Every step echoed as though the corridor were deeper than logic allowed, as if their intrusion were waking something left to rot in the dark. Riley trailed her hand along the wall, past signs bleached white with age. "This was our world," she said, almost to herself. "All our secrets locked in here, waiting for the world to forget." They moved together through the branching maze of side passages, the air growing colder and heavier the further they went. At last they came to a reinforced steel door stamped Cell 7, a battered slot for observation was set into the center, and behind it, darkness as thick as oil. Riley spun the manual release, the lever shrieking as it unlocked. The door thudded open. The cell was almost empty, only a torn feed bucket in one corner and an old ring bolt sunk into the floor. But there, gouged deep into the far wall at chest height, was a mark that stopped all three in their tracks. A single, jagged letter. P. It had been carved through the stainless finish, cutting all the way to the core, the edges rough and sharp. The mark of a hoof, not a tool. It must have taken hours, days, or longer. Carved in loneliness and fury, a message for anyone who might someday return. Ash walked forward, his head low. He pressed his nose to the mark, breathing in as if trying to draw its story into himself. Riley's voice shook. "He left it for us. For me. He knew no one was coming back, but he did it anyway." For a moment they simply stood there, three survivors of a world no one else believed in, and mourned the ghost who had called out for them in the only way he could. The silence was broken by the click of Eli's UV torch. He swept it along the base of the wall, and under the blue glow a dark stain bloomed on the metal plating. Blood, old and oxidized, stubbornly clinging to the cracks in the floor. "That's not human," Eli murmured, crouching. "It's equine, years old, but..." He moved closer. Near the far wall, three angled hoofprints had been pressed into the dust, the pattern strange, like an animal staggering, trying to stay upright. Ash let out a single low stomp. The sound rang down the corridor, echoing until it was impossible to tell if it was horse or human or something caught between. No one said anything for a long time. Riley, her eyes brimming, rested her hand on Ash's neck. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her words shivering in the gloom. "I'm so sorry I couldn't keep him safe." Ash's tail flicked, his muscles trembling with memory. Grief was a language without words, shared across species, across years. Time in that space grew thin. Riley pressed her back to the cool steel and closed her eyes. With the scent of rust and animals still fresh, the walls seemed to dissolve and the past surged up to claim her. Years ago, before the shutdown, Ash and Phantom had been kept in facing stalls here, barely a dozen yards apart, yet always aware of the other's presence. Riley had fought against the order, shouting down the chain of command when they announced the biological upgrade for Phantom. She was dragged from the observation bay, her screams echoing off the steel. "He's not ready! He's not a weapon!" Ash, frantic, had pounded his hoof 3 times against the wall. A secret rhythm, a code between brothers. "Wait here. I'll come back." Phantom turned, his dark eyes meeting Riley's one last time. No anger, no fear, just a silent farewell. A question Riley could never answer. Then they'd come, a ring of masked techs, and led Phantom away with a collar that sparked with cold blue light. There had been a scream, one Riley could never decide was pain or defiance, and then silence. Back in the present, Ash stood before the bare corner of the cell, pressing his hoof gently to the floor, directly over where Phantom had once scratched his initial. He stood that way for a long time. Riley did not try to comfort him. Some wounds belonged only to those who survived. "Facility Theta," she said quietly, "is a grave without a name for both of us." Time seemed suspended until Eli, searching for anything left unclaimed by mold and water, pried open the rusted cover of an old circuit box. Behind it, miraculously intact, was a small hard drive, shielded in lead. He slid it into the encrypted reader on his satchel. The screen lit up and a schematic of the entire Facility Theta unfurled in green and gray. Chambers, storage, hallways, but beneath them, a secret sublevel marked Zone X1. Sub-containment chamber, Riley read. That's where they took him for the upgrades? Nobody was allowed down there but core group. The screen pulsed, highlighting a single, circular chamber at the far end of the diagram. P0. No note, no detail, only a final timestamp, 9:42 p.m. 4 years ago. Eli looked from the screen to Riley and Ash. If we go down there, he said, it's not just to find Phantom. It's to understand what made him into whatever's out there now. Riley nodded, her mouth tight. He deserves that much. We all do. They gathered their courage, their grief, and their hope, and turned toward the narrow staircase leading deeper into the dark, toward the secrets that had destroyed them once before. Ash went first, always first, and as the door closed behind them, the walls of Facility Theta seemed to whisper their names, not as soldiers or animals, but as the only ones left to bear witness to the price of forget. Night fell hard on Clearwater Ridge, and with it came a stillness so deep it felt unnatural. The wind had ceased its moaning among the pine needles, the air pressed close, heavy, as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. Riley stood on the rough wooden balcony that circled the ranger station. The boards creaked quietly under her boots, but otherwise all was silent. Her hand rested on the cold steel of her rifle, not because she expected trouble, but because her instincts screamed something wasn't right. She let her eyes travel across the endless darkness beyond the security lights, the direction Ash so often stared at, as if waiting for a shadow only he could see. Inside, Eli hunched over the monitors, flickering green with static and snow. He tapped the side of the thermal cam, adjusting the settings. For a moment, the display was empty, a wash of ghostly white. Then, all at once, 3 figures flashed onto the edge of the frame, impossibly fast and tall. Each stood nearly 2 meters at the shoulder, silhouettes long and misshapen, moving through the darkness without a sound. Nothing in the Deadwood Pines database matched these readings. Eli's voice was tight. "Riley, you need to see this." Before she could move, a new sound broke through the hush. A metallic ringing, dull and hollow from the edge of the tree line. It came again, rhythm off kilter like hooves on stone, but deeper, heavier, as if iron itself had come alive and stalked the night. In the pale, unsteady light of the moon, 3 shapes emerged from the shadow of the forest. Their bodies moved like horses, but only at a glance. The truth was far stranger. Their hides glistened wetly in the cold, muscle and tendon bulging beneath veins that glowed a sickly blue. At their joints, bones jutted out in sharp, unnatural angles, metal rivets catching the moonlight where flesh should have been. Their heads were elongated, nostrils flaring wide, and in the center of each face were eyes devoid of any pupil or color, just blank discs that caught the light like frosted glass. Each beast bore a black tattoo burned into the shoulder. X3, X7, X9. They moved together without a sound, not trotting but gliding, their bodies crouched low, ready to spring. In an instant, one, X9, slung at the chain-link fence, hitting it with enough force to tear the steel mesh apart like tissue. The entire barrier crashed down in a spray of frozen dirt and snow. Eli shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. The bullet sparked off X9's shoulder, not even slowing it down. He fired again, this time at the head. The round flattened against the creature's cheekbone, leaving nothing but a shallow dent. The hide was tougher than leather, reinforced with metal, with something else inside that refused to bleed. Riley's shout split the night. "Ash!" From the darkness of the corral, Ash exploded into motion. The snow seemed to part around him, his mane wild and black against the white, his muscles corded with purpose. He met the monstrous forms head-on, his eyes burning not with terror, but with something ancient. Memory, fury, recognition. Ash let out a low, guttural sound, no wild horse scream, but the clipped, warning growl of a babel stallion. It echoed against the trees, older than any command, a sound bred into his blood. X7 broke off from the others, turning to face Ash. The two began to circle each other, neither blinking. Ash's head was low, his tail a whip of black behind him, hooves churning lines into the snow. X7 mirrored every move, a grotesque parody of the Mustang's agility, its joints clicking as it pivoted. For a moment, neither attacked. It was a dance, an ancient code, dominance, strategy, respect. Then, X7 lashed out. its hoof arcing through the air. The blow struck Ash's shoulder, raking deep enough to draw a line of blood but not enough to stop him. Ash staggered, righted himself, then launched forward, rearing high before coming down hard. His hooves crashed against X7's throat and chest, the sound like iron shattering stone. The monsters didn't make a sound. Ash did not retreat. Just as the fight teetered on the edge of chaos, a fourth shape broke from the tree line. The other creatures froze, stepping aside as if by reflex. He was larger than the others, his outline broader, armor plating layered beneath black fur and scar tissue. Yet there was a deliberateness, a presence in the way he walked, head high, nostrils wide, each step measured and sure. Riley felt her heart stutter. Phantom! It was him, but not. His body was a map of scars and grafts, metal and flesh merging in jagged seams, yet his eyes, set deep and ancient, were unchanged, still ringed with silver, still filled with a cold intelligence. Phantom stopped just beyond the ruined fence, flanked by X3 and X9, who lowered their heads as if awaiting orders. For a long moment nothing moved. Ash stared at Phantom, ears pinned, body shaking, not with fear but with the force of memory. Riley's voice was a whisper. He knows, Ash. It's not scent, it's something older. A memory neither could forget. Phantom stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He moved past the other creatures as if they were nothing, as if he existed in a time and space that belonged only to him and Ash. When he reached Ash, the two stood nose to nose, separated by little more than a breath. Ash's blood dripped steadily onto the snow. Phantom's scars gleamed in the moonlight. There was no sound, no threat, no violence. Then, slowly, Phantom raised his right foreleg, not high, not as if to strike, but in a motion that spoke of ritual. With a single, practiced arc, he brought his hoof down across Ash's ribs, slicing just deep enough to open a wound, a line of blood that glistened red against gray hide. Ash did not flinch. He did not fight back. He received the blow, standing still, his own breath clouding in the air. It was not a strike of hatred or even dominance. It was something else, a mark, a memory, a bond reforged and broken all at once. Phantom's eyes softened just for an instant. Then, without a word, he turned away. He made no move to harm Riley or Eli, nor did he command the others to attack. Riley understood, even if she could not explain it. He's telling Ash, and us, I remember. But I'm not what I was, not anymore. With a single heavy stomp of his hoof, Phantom signaled to X3 and X9. The other two creatures turned as one and slipped back into the darkness, their forms vanishing among the trees as if swallowed whole by the night. Eli took a step forward, gun half raised. Riley caught his arm, her grip fierce. Don't. If he wanted us gone, we would be. Ash stood alone in the middle of the torn yard, blood still dripping from his side. The snow caught each drop, blooming scarlet, a silent testament to what had passed. He did not cry out. He did not collapse. He simply stood, staring after the retreating forms, his body a map of old and new wounds. The night was silent again, but it was not peace. It was the hush that followed an earthquake, the breathless moment before the next aftershock. Riley pressed her hand to the banister, feeling it shake beneath her palm. Whatever had begun in the bowels of Facility Theta was not finished. The ghosts of that place, man and beast, had returned. And now, as the last echoes faded, all Riley could do was stand beside Ash in the moonlight, listening to the distant, impossible sound of metal on stone, and wonder what part of Phantom, if any, had come home at all. After the chaos, as the wounds of the night still throbbed and the snow began to settle around the battered station, it seemed as if the worst had passed. Ash stood sentry in the half-light, his breaths rising in sharp clouds, the echo of Phantom's mark fresh and burning on his side. But then, from the shadows of the opposite tree line, a new figure emerged, a human silhouette, unhurried, unarmed, but bringing with her the same chill that had haunted these woods since the beginning. Dana Rivers. She had once worn the white coat of a scientist, lead advisor to the White Fire Project. Now she wore a heavy ranger's parka, the emblem of Montana conservation stitched on her sleeve. Her hair was pulled back, face drawn tight and careful. She walked forward, with her hands visible as if expecting gunfire or worse. But in her right palm, held almost reverently, was a device. A slender, wrist-mounted controller, its surface a matrix of glowing symbols. It was the same type of instrument once used to command the war Mustangs, to strip them of will, to make weapons of their memories. Riley, standing at the threshold, saw the device before she saw the woman. Her voice was steel. "You've been watching us since the start, haven't you?" Dana gave a small, humorless smile. "Of course I have. Whitefire never died, Riley. It only changed shape." Ash stepped forward, a deep warning rumble vibrating through his chest. He placed himself squarely between Riley and Dana, every line of his body radiating the message, "No closer." Before another word could be spoken, before confrontation could harden into violence, something in the forest shifted. A presence moved through the trees. A presence so weighty that even the wind seemed to shy away. Phantom returned. He came alone this time, stepping out of the darkness with the slow, deliberate gait of an animal who knew every eye was on him. X3 and X9 were gone, melted into shadow. Only Phantom remained, his coat marked by wounds, his bearing dignified but weary. He walked toward Dana with a gravity that made each step feel ceremonial. The snow quieted around him. His mane, streaked with the frost of battle, caught the last glint of moonlight. Dana raised the device, her fingers curling around it possessively. Her voice was a hiss, half command, half plea. "You're still under protocol, aren't you, Phantom? You still respond to command. Show them who's in control." But Phantom didn't stop out of obedience. He stopped just short of her, his head level with her chest, his gaze holding hers not as a servant, but as an equal. Or perhaps as a judge. The forest waited. Riley held her breath, Eli's hands clenched on his rifle. Ash stood, every muscle taut, waiting for the signal he hoped would never come. Time dilated. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then, without warning, Phantom snapped his head up, jaws wide. He closed his teeth, not on Dana herself, but on the wrist that held the device. His grip was firm, controlled, enough to break skin, enough to shock, but not enough to maim. Dana gasped in pain, stumbling backward. The controller slipped from her grasp, tumbling to the ground with a muted clatter. Phantom planted a forehoof on it, pinning it in place. Then, with slow, deliberate force, he brought his head down. His massive jaws closed over the fragile machinery, crunching it to scrap with a sound that echoed across the silent clearing, a sound that felt like shackles being shattered. Metal shards and circuits fell to the snow. The last light on the device flickered and died. It was a death knell, not just for a piece of technology, but for the power it had held over every Mustang, who'd borne a code instead of a name. Dana staggered back, staring in disbelief at the ruined remains. Her bravado had vanished, replaced by naked fear. You're resisting?" Her voice was small, trembling, not the voice of a scientist or a master, but of a person suddenly faced with the enormity of her own choices. Phantom met her eyes, the line of his jaw steady. He offered no sound, no explanation. His resistance needed no words. It was absolute. For a moment, time held its breath. Phantom did not advance. He did not trample Dana, did not unleash years of suffering upon her in a flash of violence. He merely stood, broad-shouldered and silent, as if awaiting judgment from a court only he could convene. Dana's knees buckled. She dropped to the snow, not out of pain, but out of the sheer devastation of being recognized, not as a villain, not as a foe to be destroyed, but as something far less, irrelevant. Phantom's refusal to attack, to even acknowledge her further, was the cruelest sentence of all. Riley stepped forward, but Ash blocked her path. No one intervened. This was not a human story any longer. This was the reckoning of beings who had been stripped of their voices, now reclaiming their right to decide. It was not forgiveness that filled the silence, nor was it hate. What lingered was freedom, raw and dangerous. A soul's refusal to be named by someone else's language, to be defined by someone else's war. Dana's eyes filled with tears. I thought you were only what we made you." Phantom did not even flick an ear. His gaze was past her now, past all of them, searching the horizon for a place beyond the reach of cages and commands. Phantom turned, slowly, as if time itself bent to let him leave. He did not glance at Riley, nor at Ash, nor at the woman whose hands had written his fate in code and steel. Step by step he walked into the trees, his form growing smaller with each stride. The forest accepted him wordlessly. Even the falling snow seemed to pause, suspended in air until he had disappeared beneath the canopy. No one followed, not a single hoofbeat or boot broke the spell he left behind. It was as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for him to be out of sight before it dared to move again. As Phantom vanished into the darkness, the snow began to fall once more, gently at first, then thick and insistent, restoring the silence, covering the blood, the scars, the broken chains. The woods breathed out, softer, emptier. Ash remained in the clearing, his body motionless, the snow now gathering on his coat. The blood from Phantom's mark had dried into his hide, a brand of memory that would not fade with weather or time. He did not run after his brother, did not call, did not protest. His eyes, red-rimmed and haunted, stared into the darkness where Phantom had gone. Tears threatened but did not fall. They hung suspended, as if even grief itself was too heavy for this night. Riley moved to stand beside him, her hand trembling as she laid it gently on his neck. Ash neither shied away nor leaned in. They stood together, two survivors united in the aching void that followed. It was a moment stretched impossibly thin, a silence deeper than any storm, larger than the forest itself. The kind of silence born not from peace, but from a wound too deep to be mended by words or even touch. Because some farewells were not marked by embraces, nor by shouts of anger. Sometimes the pain was too great, the love too complicated, the history too long. All that remained was the promise, spoken not aloud, but in every scar, every choice. I will not become what you made me. I will remember, and I will go on. The storm had passed. The snow still fell, softer now, as though the world itself wanted to bury what had happened at Clearwater Ridge. But Riley Shaw could not allow it. Not anymore. For years she'd hidden from her past, changing names, roles, and stations, never daring to look back at the darkness she'd helped unleash. Now she walked straight into it, no longer a shadow among the pines, but a witness. Inside the ranger station, she set up the battered old laptop, one of the few pieces of her army life she'd kept. Her hands trembled only slightly as she connected the drive Eli had recovered at Facility Theta. There it was, not just memory, but proof. Video files showed the training of war Mustangs, maps marked with Zone X and hidden sub-basements, biometric logs of experiments run on Phantom, Ash, and those who had only numbers instead of names. There were audio recordings too, orders barked by unseen men, clinical voices discussing upgrades and failures, and, worst of all, plans to erase mistakes by fire. She tried at first to route the files through the government network where she'd once worked. A firewall blocked her. But the world had changed since Whitefire was conceived. Animal rights groups watched for leaks. Veterans, disillusioned by secret wars, had their own back channels. A few anonymous allies reached out, promising to boost the story if she could get the files past the first gate. So Riley stopped hiding. She used her real name. She signed the statement herself, in ink as clear and final as snowfall on a silent field. Riley Shaw. Subject 4. With one click she set the truth loose. There would be no taking it back. Within hours, the first blogs picked up the files, screenshots of horses in harnesses, glimpses of the labyrinthine Facility Theta, scans of Riley's Army ID. By morning the country was aflame. Headlines howled, bioweapons program disguised as wildlife conservation, the Montana Files, Whitefire, when horses ceased to be animals and became targets. Commentators raged, scientists recoiled, and ordinary people struggled to process what had happened in their own backyards. Some doubted, but the video left little to interpretation. Children sent letters scrawled in colored pencil in hope to the White House, pleading for the horses with stolen souls to be set free. Activist groups demanded an end to genetic manipulation of any wild species without strict ethical review. The anger spread, but so did something else, a kind of reckoning. For too long, the belief had held that nature existed to be bent, refined, and weaponized. Now the world was forced to see what such logic wrought, not just in ruined lives, but in the eyes of a living creature who had refused to become a monster. Politicians who'd kept silent now called for full federal investigation. Some did so out of principle, others out of self-preservation, but the effect was the same. The darkness of Whitefire was dragged, writhing into the light. The heart of Whitefire was not in Montana, but in Colorado, in a mountainside villa where Dr. Charles Voss lived beneath a false name, still monitoring the signals of the last war Mustang. It was Riley's files that made the link unbreakable. Emails, receipts, a direct command chain from the highest levels of the Defense Biotech Institute. The FBI moved quickly, joined by the Marshals, who, until that night, had never believed such a program could exist outside of science fiction. They found Voss in his study staring at a wall of screens tracking movement through the snow. Clearwater Ridge, still pulsing on a private satellite feed. He barely looked up as agents poured into the room. "So," he said, "you're alive after all, Ms. Shaw. Fascinating." His voice was cold, clinical, unshaken. The world would remember the footage of his arrest. The architect of Whitefire led away in cuffs, refusing to bow his head. The message was clear. Even those who believed themselves untouchable could be brought down by the truth. In the days that followed, others emerged from the shadows. Technicians, guards, junior researchers, all confessed, their stories echoing the files Riley had exposed. The chain of complicity snapped, and with it, the myth of control that had haunted every horse, every soldier, every silent place in the woods. Through it all, Ash remained at Clearwater Ridge. He was no longer a tool nor a fugitive. The state, pressed by public outcry and new federal regulations, allowed him to stay under protection but not under lock and key. The government tried to insist on handlers and monitoring, but the townsfolk, who'd watched him save Riley and Eli, spoke up. "He's earned the right to choose," they said. A week after the story broke, the small community held a ceremony. Ash was led, not by a bridle, but by gentle hands, onto a makeshift stage in the town square. His scars were visible, his eyes deep with things no human would ever fully grasp. Riley stood beside him, her speech short and unadorned. "We created Ash to serve, but he's taught us what freedom really is. He forgives not because he forgets, but because he understands that anger is just another chain, and he chooses not to wear it." Until this moment, Cleese had not bought Riley's audacity, which, though not divine, children brought drawings, some crude, some astonishingly detailed, depicting Mustangs galloping across snowy hills or standing dignified in the light of dawn. Ash lowered his head to let a little girl press a daisy behind his ear. For a moment, the horrors of Whitefire seemed impossibly far away. One small boy tugged Riley's jacket, his voice shy but clear. "Do you think Phantom will ever come back?" Riley knelt, meeting his gaze. "If he still remembers his name," she whispered. "Then it's never too late." Ash flicked an ear as if in silent agreement. Facility Theta was shuttered, its doors welded shut. No public tours, no glossy plaques, just a simple sign carved by Riley's own hand, set into the stone above the old steel entrance. This place once held ghosts. Now, it holds memory. The federal government announced the complete dissolution of Whitefire, the end of all adaptive bioweapon funding, and the implementation of sweeping new restrictions on genetic research for military purposes. But Riley knew, so did Ash, that as long as humanity believed it could design the spirit of another living being, some new ghost would always be waiting to step from the shadows. So they stayed at Clearwater Ridge. For Riley, it was a duty, a promise never to look away again. For Ash, it was something quieter, older. He roamed the fields and forests as he pleased, never venturing far, always returning at dusk to the edge of the station's clearing. Sometimes, at night, Riley would find Ash standing by the fence, eyes fixed on the distant tree line, waiting, perhaps, for the sound of another set of hooves, for the return of the friend who had walked away not in anger, but in hope. The world moved on, as it always does, but in the hush of snow, in the fragile peace after the storm, memory lived on, not as accusation, but as a promise. A promise that freedom, once tasted, could never again be mistaken for anything less. It was a night like any other, a silent, ordinary beginning to the first week of winter at Clearwater Ridge. No alarms, no strange weather sweeping down from the mountains, just the familiar hush that blanketed the ranger station and the surrounding forest, so deep it seemed to swallow even the memory of danger. Riley sat alone at her desk, the glow of the security monitors washing her face in cold blue. Outside, the world was still. She sipped coffee gone lukewarm, watching the infrared feeds flicker from camera to camera. Every inch of the northern woods, the place where Phantom had last disappeared, remained empty. Nothing moved but the drifting patterns of wind through snow. Then, as she cycled through the final feed, one distant camera set above a clearing deep within the forest, the screen flickered, static chased across the frame. For a moment, everything went dark. Riley's pulse quickened, old instincts snapping awake. The image steadied, and in the far corner something appeared, a shape both foreign and heartbreakingly familiar. She leaned forward, holding her breath. There, against the stark white of untouched snow, lay a lone Mustang. She knew him instantly. Even without the glint of armored plates, without the prowling, haunted presence that had stalked the edges of their nightmares for so long, she would have known. Phantom lay on his side, his dark body curled into the soft bank of a snowdrift. His head rested gently atop a small rise in the earth, as if he had chosen this place for its peace, not by accident but by an act of will. His body had changed, sharply thinner now, ribs faintly visible beneath a hide once marked by chrome and code. The patches where the BioWare had once gleamed had faded. Some pieces looked torn free, others simply shed, as if his body had decided at last to reclaim itself. His eyes were closed, not from exhaustion, Riley sensed, but from choice. A deliberate stillness. There was no blood, no sign of violence, no wound to be found. Only the subtle shuddering rise and fall of his chest, slowing, as the camera watched from a respectful distance. She magnified the feed, searching for anything danger, intrusion, some hint of what might have driven him here. But there was nothing. No enemy. No predator, no pursuer. Just a creature at the end of a long and harrowing journey, laying himself down with the dignity of one who knows he will not get up again. For the first time since the day she'd watched him vanish, Riley felt the truth settle in her chest. Phantom was not running anymore. He was not a weapon or a target or a legend. He was just done. She pulled up movement logs from the past 72 hours, scrolling through the data in disbelief. There had been no disturbances, no tracks except Phantom's appearing far upstream, winding through the brush, straight toward this spot. No human presence. No animal crossing his path. He had come here by himself, choosing the clearing with intent. He lay down as the snow began to fall, tucking his legs beneath him for comfort, not collapse. She could imagine him taking one last look around, measuring the sky, the trees, the silence he had fought so hard to reclaim. Perhaps he knew his body was failing, that the long fight against what had been forced into him could not last forever. Or maybe, after tearing the last threads of control from his mind, after shattering the device that had once bound him, he simply decided that it was time. His own time. His own place. Not as a machine, not as a fugitive, not as a specter slipping into legend, but as a living soul, able to choose the ending that no one else could write for him. Riley didn't say a word. She turned the monitor so Ash, waiting outside the office as he always did at night, could see. She simply opened the door, the hush of the room replaced by the heavy silence of two beings who knew what loss meant. Ash stepped forward, slow and deliberate. He stopped a few feet from the screen, staring at the frozen image of Phantom on the snow. He didn't whinny. He didn't stomp or toss his mane, didn't strain against some unseen tether as he once might have. He just stood, every muscle locked in place, his head dipped slightly. His eyes were wide, but there was nothing frantic in them, no wild hope, no desperate longing. The search was over. Ash understood with the strange, wordless wisdom that only animals possess that there would be no more reunions. Riley felt her throat tighten. She wanted to reach out, to touch Ash's mane, to offer comfort or ask for it. She wasn't sure which. But she stayed back. Some griefs had to be honored in silence. Ash's shadow stretched long across the floor, reaching toward the screen, toward the friend he had once promised to wait for through all the long years of uncertainty. Now that promise was spent, the last thread between them gently cut. No one saw Ash cry, no one saw the great Mustang shake with sobs or collapse in mourning, but those who knew him, who understood the scars beneath the silver-gray coat, saw something deeper. Ash did not leave the room, not as the night stretched on and the world outside faded into the hush of snow. He did not turn away from the screen, did not eat, did not rest. He simply remained, eyes locked on the gentle, unmoving figure in the clearing, as if he could bear witness by sheer presence. Riley sat beside him on the floor, saying nothing. She didn't try to explain or narrate or find words for what had passed. Instead, she let the quiet surround them, a cathedral of memory more sacred than any sermon. After what felt like an eternity, hours measured only by the slow tick of the clock and the growing paleness of dawn, Riley whispered, so softly she wasn't sure she spoke at all. Ed didn't die because of the science, not because of battle or because anyone gave him the order. He died because, for the first time, he got to choose. And he chose to let go. Ash didn't move, but she knew he heard. When the first gray light crept across the fields, Ash finally rose, muscles trembling with the weight of a night that had changed everything. He walked slowly to the gate at the edge of the compound, pausing there in the soft snow. He turned once, glancing back, not at Riley but at the distant place where Phantom's body still lay, hidden from all but the memory of the trees and the silent witness of the cameras. Just one look. Not regret, not bitterness, just acceptance, and a farewell no voice could speak. Ash didn't linger. He walked into the cold morning, shoulders squared, spirit quiet. He left behind a chapter closed. Not in anger or anguish, but in the simple, inarguable right of a soul to decide when enough was enough. Riley stood at the window and watched until he was gone. The echo of Phantom's last choice ringing in her heart like a silent bell. There are moments, Riley would later realize, when the world insists on a return to the old ways, as if time itself aches to snap back into the shape it always knew. After Phantom vanished forever into the snow, no final cry, no orders given, no witness but the silent woods, she found herself standing on the threshold of a life that no longer fit. The idea of going back, of simply returning to the old rhythms of patrol, report, and rescue, seemed impossible. He and Ash lingered in that liminal space for days. The station at Clearwater Ridge felt both too small and too haunted, the forest too vast and too silent. But grief, like memory, demands action. And so, with no fanfare, no ceremony, Riley and Ash began to build something new, an answer to the question that Phantom had asked with his last, unbroken choice. What do you do with a soul that cannot, will not, be made a tool? The answer became Echo Mustang Division, MD, not a unit, not a command, not a secret project or a line item on any ledger, just a place, a promise, a future neither dictated nor controlled. EMD was born not from the ruins of war or the blueprints of strategy, but from a longing for trust, for healing, for a kind of dignity that could not be bred or programmed. They chose the edge of deadwood pines, a gentle slope above the river where wild horses had once come to drink. Long before fences, long before men. There were no barracks, no stables, no iron gates. The only building was a modest log cabin repurposed from an old observation post, its porch wide enough for Ash to stand sentry every night. The insignia of EMD was nothing more than Ash's hoofprint, pressed into a slab of rough-hewn pine and nailed above the door. No badge, no barcode, no authority, just a mark, a memory, a claim that said this is where you are allowed to be free. On the first morning, Riley took a strip of soft, worn leather and fashioned a simple collar. She pressed the letters herself, one by one, with an old soldering iron, EMD 011. It was not a number, not really. It was a badge of honor, an acknowledgement that Ash was the first, the proof of concept, not for war or control, but for the radical idea that memory could be trusted and that freedom must be chosen, never given. She buckled the collar gently around Ash's neck, whispering as she did, "This isn't to mark you as property, it's to remind all of us you began something new." Ash didn't need a halter or a bit. He came and went as he pleased, wandering the banks of the river at dawn, leading the other Mustangs to the sheltering copse when storms rolled down from the peaks. At night he stood silent by the porch, his head high, listening for threats or for nothing at all, as if both were equally important. And when new arrivals came, broken, battered, half-mad with the memory of pain, it was always Ash who greeted them first. He would approach, unhurried, ears forward, calm. Sometimes it took minutes, sometimes hours, sometimes the whole day. Riley watched and learned. "I can teach skills," she'd say to those who came seeking to help, "but only he can teach trust." They came in ones and twos, sometimes under cover of darkness, sometimes in battered horse trailers driven by volunteers who wanted only to forget what they'd seen. There was no intake paperwork, no battery of tests, only two rules. 1, the horse must cross the threshold willingly of their own accord. 2, no horse would ever be locked in a stall. Ash would stand just inside the open gate, eyes solemn, body still. For some, the act of walking in took seconds. For others, like the old gray with 3 legs, a survivor of a failed experiment, missing half his mane and the light in one eye, it took 10 full minutes. Ash never rushed him, never prodded or called. He simply waited, as if to say, "You are not late, you are not lost. When you are ready, you will come." And when the gray finally stepped inside, his head bowed low, Riley felt her own heart twist with pride and humility. Here, the past was not denied, but neither was it a chain. Some horses bore the marks of still active chips beneath their skin. Some were blind, some lame, some so terrified of humans they would stand pressed against the fence for hours, shivering. But none were ever forced to perform, to obey, or to redeem themselves. Here, survival was enough, presence was enough. Word of EMD spread faster than Riley could have imagined. Letters came from military units, from federal agencies, from rescue organizations, offering funding, technology, a chance to turn EMD into the world's first biological rapid response unit. She turned every offer down. EMD was not built for crisis response. It existed for healing, for holding memory, for relearning the shape of hope. These were not animals to be repurposed for the next emergency. These were survivors, reclaiming the right to their own decisions, their own peace. Each morning, instead of drills or exercise regimens, Riley would stand at the center of the paddock and bow her head for 10 minutes, the silent ceremony. The horses joined her. Some stood close, some farther away, but all were quiet, honoring those who had not returned. Slowly, the new arrivals began to change. One by one, they edged closer to the humans who came to feed and care for them. They learned to accept a hand on their shoulder, to let a child braid their mane, and, in time, when they were ready, not before, they would run beside Ash, tails streaming, no longer refugees but companions. They don't need training, Riley explained to a visiting journalist. They need to remember that not every touch is a trap, that not every command is a threat. Some of them will never let a human ride again, and that's their right. We don't rescue to repay us. We rescue so they can reclaim themselves. The press called EMD the first humane bioreactive unit, but Riley refused any title. "We are not a unit," she insisted. "We are a choice. Every day, every horse here chooses to stay, and so do we." Above the open gate, carved into the weathered wood, was a single inscription. "We were once numbers. Now we are hoofprints. No one belongs here until they choose to walk in with their own heartbeat." And every sunrise, Riley would find Ash at the threshold, the morning light throwing his shadow across the land he had claimed, not as a survivor of war, but as the first citizen of a republic of the free. Beside him, there was always another, once rejected, once broken, now standing tall, learning once again how to trust the world and themselves. Sometimes, in the golden hush before day, Riley would stand with them, hand resting gently on Ash's neck, and whisper, "You're not alone anymore. None of you are." In the silence, the only answer was the soft sound of hooves, moving forward, always, toward a future no one could ever write for them. It was a spring morning at Echo Mustang Division, if such a thing still existed. Sunlight poured through a thin mist on the south pasture, dappling the wild grass in gold and green. Ash, always the sentinel, was already leading a group of young Mustangs into the field, his movement as steady and sure as the heartbeat of this odd sanctuary they'd built. Riley lingered by the porch, mug in hand, letting the air fill her lungs, a ritual as much about memory as about the new day. The world outside the fences for the first time in years felt quiet. Letters arrived each week, mostly bureaucratic, supply orders, permits, thank you notes from local schools, sometimes a shy envelope from a child with careful crayon drawings of horses running free. Echo was a place where trouble could, for a moment, seem far away. But that morning, tucked at the bottom of the metal mailbox, was a plain, brown envelope. No return address, no postage. Just her name scrawled in a hurried, unsteady hand. Subject 4 is still alive. Activate D-plan. Beneath the message, a symbol was drawn. A broken triangle, sharp and unmistakable. Riley's breath caught. That mark, crude and quick as it was, belonged to a place she'd spent years trying to forget. The inner sanctum of Whitefire, the project that had nearly destroyed them all. She stared at the envelope, her heart thumping, as if the chill that skated up her spine could freeze out the sun. She took the envelope into her office and sat, not trusting her legs. Even with the door closed, she felt exposed, as if someone were watching from the tree line. Her hands trembled. She clenched them into fists, knuckles white. A memory surfaced, unbidden. Voss's voice at his arrest, cold and clinical. You think you ended it, don't you? What you saw was only the outer shell. The real work lives on. D-plan. She'd only ever heard it in whispers, snatches of conversation during late-night meetings that always ended in locked doors and silences. D-plan, short for dominate phase. It was never written in official records, never referenced in protocols, but the meaning was clear, even if she'd spent years trying not to believe it. Dominate phase wasn't about controlling bodies. It was about dominating will, obliterating the boundary between instinct and obedience, between memory and self. In the deepest, most secretive meetings, the plan was spoken of like a myth, a final frontier, not just training an animal, not just programming responses. D-plan was about creating creatures that would need no handler, that would internalize command as truth until their choices were no longer their own. That possibility had haunted her, even as she tried to expose Whitefire's crimes. She set the letter on her desk, staring at it, and thought about all she had seen, all she had fought to leave behind. The air in the office felt heavy, pressing in, and she pressed the palms of her hands to her forehead, trying to slow the pounding in her skull. Later that day, Riley took the letter out to the paddock, holding it where Ash could see. The big Mustang approached slowly, head low, eyes wary. She offered the envelope. He sniffed it, his nostrils flaring, and then let out a deep, guttural sound that was neither fear nor aggression, a low, trembling rumble of memory. Something in that scent, something beneath the ink and the musty paper spoke of a time before Echo, before even Phantom, before choice was even a question. She stroked his mane, uncertain. Ash turned away as if ashamed to let her see the tremor in his body. Over the next 3 days, Ash began to change. It was subtle at first. He stopped leading the younger horses on their daily rounds, began patrolling the western fence line alone at dusk. Every muscle tense, ears scanning for sounds only he seemed to hear. He stopped sleeping near the others, standing instead with his back to the wind, motionless except for the way his hooves churned the earth, drawing shapes Riley could not understand. One night, unable to sleep, Riley saw him from the porch. Ash was pacing in circles, his body rigid, his head lowered. She took a flashlight and went out into the cold. When she drew near, the beam illuminated 4 words scratched shakily into the earth by his hoof. Words that made her throat close up. There's still a herd. The message was not for her alone, it was for anyone who would listen. Riley spent that night in the archives, poring over the data salvaged from Facility Theta. Scattered files, corrupted drives, fragments of logs that had never made it into the official record. Most of it was indecipherable, but one notation caught her eye. D9SH. She stared at the letters, trying to recall the old code structures. D9, Unit 9, likely an experimental cohort. S, Shepherd. V, M, Virginia Appalachian Sector. There was a line in the margin, barely legible, almost erased. Does not require remote control. Will protect or destroy as assigned. Target not required to be human. A herd then, not just individuals. An entire unit relocated, unaccounted for when Whitefire fell. No genetic records, no ID chips, just this. A class of beings engineered to accept purpose not from outside, but as their own. She felt the bottom drop out of her world. If D-Plan had begun, if these creatures existed somewhere out there, creatures designed not only to follow orders but to make the act of following indistinguishable from their very nature, then everything they'd fought for was at risk. Phantom's End was not the end at all. It was a prelude. She looked out the window at Ash, still patrolling beneath the moonlight, and felt a new fear, one she could not easily name. That morning, Riley burned the original letter in the old cast-iron stove. She watched the paper curl and blacken, the edges glowing, then falling to ash. Before the fire was out, Ash appeared in the doorway, his shadow falling over the threshold. His eyes, usually calm and bright, seemed older, darker, full of a knowledge he could not share. "Is it starting again?" she whispered, as if afraid of the answer. Ash did not move, but he turned to the main sign at the entrance of Echo Mustang Division and waited as Riley took out her old wood-burning pen. With steady hands, she added a new inscription beneath the symbol of Ash's hoof. "We were made once. Now we choose to exist. And we will not let them make us again." She looked up at Ash, and the Mustang nodded, ever so slightly. No government would protect them, she knew. No law would save what was most precious here, the right to choose, to refuse, to guard memory against the world's desire to remake it. But this time they would not be silent, this time they would answer. The woods were alive with the promise of spring, but Riley felt a chill in the air, an echo of old battles, old betrayals, and the cost of standing guard over what should never have been created. She looked to Ash, to the young horses at his side, and felt, for a moment, the weight of everything still unspoken between them. D-Plan was in motion, but Echo Mustang was ready, and if anyone tried to cross their threshold, to take back what had already been lost once, there would be no easy victory. Not this time. The sky was the color of wet stone, a pale hush of morning hanging over the rolling foothills. Sleet glazed the tall grass, painting every blade in a thin shroud of glass. In the half-light before sunrise, the world looked unfinished, quiet as the inside of a memory. Inside the weathered outpost that was now Echo Mustang Division's headquarters, Riley moved with practiced silence. She opened the bottom drawer of her desk, a battered thing of pine and old army stencils, and pulled out a sand-colored field jacket. She ran her fingers over the faded fabric, the threadbare patches along the sleeves. This was the same coat she had worn as Subject 4, back in days best left unspoken. She slipped it on, not out of nostalgia or pride, but to carry the weight of everything that had never been said aloud. Ash was waiting on the porch, his hooves planted firm against the creaking wood, the faint steam of his breath rising in the chill. He stamped once, twice, then a third time, 3 slow, resonant strikes, deep as a heartbeat. Riley nodded in answer. No words passed between them. There was no need for plans, no briefing, no map. What they sought was not marked on any chart. They turned their backs to the low buildings of Echo Mustang Division, not to leave behind what they'd built, but to keep watch over something deeper still, a truth that neither time nor silence had erased. And so, without fanfare, they stepped into the waking mist, walking not away from sanctuary, but toward the unfinished business that still lingered in the forest's breath. They didn't go hunting. There were no rifles slung over shoulders, no tranquilizer darts, no cages. Riley carried only a battered first aid kit, a thick leather-bound notebook, and a pencil sharpened to a careful point. Ash led, Riley just behind, her boots leaving faint impressions alongside the prints of his hooves. It was enough. They entered the western Appalachian woods, a region once marked off-limits in the internal memos of Whitefire, a phrase Riley could still hear echoing in Voss's clipped, bureaucratic cadence. The forest here was older than the world's ambitions, tangled and quiet, fog clinging low to the ground. They moved carefully, not out of fear, but out of respect for all the things that couldn't be seen or named. They weren't looking for an enemy. They were searching for life, specifically for those other Mustangs that D-Plan had abandoned. Living memories trapped in muscle and scar, creatures bred not to speak, only to obey. But the mission wasn't to capture or destroy, it was to listen, to find and then to tell them, maybe for the first time, that their silence was no longer required. As she ducked beneath a low branch, Riley whispered, "We're not here to right every wrong, we're here to listen, because no one else ever has." Ash's ears flicked in her direction, then back again. He moved forward, each step careful but unwavering, as if he were following an old song buried beneath the leaf mold. There were no tracks to follow, but Ash seemed to know, instinct or memory or something older, exactly where he was meant to go. The forest thickened as they walked. Sunlight was just beginning to warm the highest ridges, turning the frost to steam. They crossed a ruined checkpoint, its walls still scarred by deep, jagged gouges, marks of a code only the battle Mustangs knew. Riley's hand brushed over one, reading its story by touch, recalling what was left unsaid in the field reports. Farther along, they came to a broken bridge spanning a narrow ravine. Riley paused, remembering Phantom had once leapt that gap to save her during a test gone wrong. Muscles bunched and flying, freedom and fear wound together in the same impossible moment. The bridge had fallen since, but the memory remained. Ash stopped beneath a towering pine whose trunk twisted in the wind. He stood still, his nostrils flaring, then lowered his head until his forehead just brushed the rough bark. He stayed like that for a long moment, silent, unmoving. Riley took out her notebook and wrote, "First contact, not in words, but in remembrance." It dawned on her, Ash wasn't just leading her through the woods. He was leading her through a history that no one else would ever see, a map not of place, but of pain, and the long work of surviving it. At every clearing, every scarred tree, every quiet pause, Ash was saying the things Riley could never force into words. "I was once a tool, but now I am the one who remembers, the one who tells the story." What Riley could not say, Ash conveyed in movement, standing silently beneath shattered branches, scraping a hoof across soft earth, tapping out a rhythm of memory in the mud. His silence had a weight to it, a living, breathing testimony that no official report could hold. The future was uncertain. Neither of them knew what they would find ahead. An SH unit still functioning, a Mustang twisted by too many years of failed programming, a living thing too far gone to remember freedom. They walked into the unknown, their path unmarked, the day opening before them one uncertain hour at a time. But they kept going, because Echo Mustang Division was not simply a refuge for survivors. It was a place to begin again, and every new beginning, Riley realized, required a return to where the ending had once seemed absolute. She paused on a mossy knoll, letting her hand rest gently on Ash's warm, scarred neck. For a moment she let the world go silent around them, the hush of the trees, the sigh of distant wind, her own breath echoing in her chest. She whispered so quietly that only Ash could hear, "You're not here for vengeance. You're here to return what was stolen, the right to say, 'I am myself.'" Ash didn't move, but she felt him understand. There was a soft tremor beneath her palm, a pulse that matched her own. They moved forward together, not in haste, not with fear, and never once looking back. Each step was a reclamation, not just of land or body, but of a story once denied, a history written in code and silence, and now, finally, being told in the voices of those who had survived. In the end, it was not darkness that defined them, but the stubborn, flickering hope that memory, once freed, could light the path through even the deepest shadow. They pressed on into the forest, and the story, for the first time, was theirs to finish.
Thank you for staying with us until the end of this story. We'd love to hear from you. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and let us know your favorite part. If you enjoyed the journey, Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories like this one. And don't miss out. Hit the notification bell so you're always updated on our latest content. Your support truly means the world to us.